All right, again, welcome. Thank you for being here. This is the Computer Science Internship panel. I have two panelists. There might be a third one joining us shortly, but they are here to share their experience with all of you. I'm going to stop sharing this first screen here, and I'm going to spotlight our panelists so you can see them. All right. So rather than me try to introduce them, I'm going to have them introduce themselves. And so if you would start by introducing yourself, letting us know your name, your class year, what organizations you've interned for in the past, just to kind of get us started. Sneha, do you want to start?
Sure. So hi, my name's Sneha. I'm a junior at the University of Maryland, majoring in computer science, and I'm minoring in business analytics. And I interned my freshman year summer at Geller and Company, headquartered in New York City. And this past summer, I worked at CoStar Group, which is headquartered in Washington, D.C. So yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Nandini. I'm a sophomore computer science major, minoring in global poverty and in mathematics. This past summer, I interned, and I'm currently still interning for them, a startup called Milk Crate based out of Philadelphia. The summer before, I worked for an economic development council outside of a suburb of Pennsylvania or Philadelphia.
Great, thank you. So you talked a little bit about the internships that you've had. Maybe what was your first internship specifically, or experience that related to the field or industry? And tell us a little bit about what you did in that internship.
So at my first internship, I had worked at Geller and Company. So that's where I really had my first experience at more of a corporate world. So I really worked on front end development. So I was able to create a fraud detection site. So it sort of validated incoming checks. And that was just something that was really interesting because I really got an experience of what my work would do and how it would impact a company. And being able to experience that was just something that I think was really important because it really sort of allowed me to understand what I really enjoyed and applying what I learned from school in a real world experience. So
yeah, so my first internship was actually before I started my major at the University of Maryland because I'm only a sophomore. But with that, I was able to use statistical analysis and introduction to both AWS and cloud computing to work with data analytics. So I was working with their data that they collected from the different STEM initiative programs that the organization I worked for collected to help with coming up with different solutions. So for me, what I thought was really interesting was it was the first time I was applying these general concepts that I wanted to learn into real world application, which also helped me figure out what concentration I'm looking into doing at Maryland for machine learning. So, yeah.
Awesome. So what advice would you give to a student that maybe has little to maybe no internship experience? What maybe helped you as you were applying to that first job, either skills that you highlighted or places that you looked that you found really helpful? What are some things that might help them stand out as a competitive candidate?
I definitely think that really being able to do your own projects and having that sort of experience that is showing your interest and being able to do just projects that interest you and for example just creating a React project or something like that, just showing just exploring different topics and also taking courses on Udemy and Coursera and things like that just helps you stand out. Also just being able to for example exploring AWS and things like that, maybe trying to get a certification in that is something I think that's really beneficial, especially in such a competitive field.
Yeah, I think Sneha really nailed it with what you should be doing. I think the personal projects are really important. And I think that if you have the time sitting down learning like different languages or introducing yourself to different platforms or different UIs, learning like different things between GitHub or AWS, like things like that. Not everything that you need to know for your internships are taught in Maryland classes necessarily. So making sure you're branching yourself outwards, and then also those projects are then you can explore more with your cover letters that you have to write or during an interview process, or if they ask for additional information about you, things that don't really fit into a perfect bubble on your resume will also help you highlight you and make you stand out to the other people applying for those same jobs.
Awesome. So sometimes I get the feedback from students that as first year students or even second year students, sometimes it's impossible or it's just really hard to get an internship because you haven't taken certain coursework or things like that. But obviously, if you're here telling me you're a sophomore, you've had an internship, right? So it's not impossible. What are some what are some hard skills? Like, are there specific programming languages that every employer is looking for? Is there something that like, if you can just get a certain skill or experience, that's what's going to get your foot in the door? Or is it just kind of finding the right organization at the right time?
For me, my internship I did after summer, after freshman year going into sophomore year, and it's a 6-month thing, so I'm still working for them. I focused mainly looking at more startups or small companies that they're looking for extra manpower to begin with. So those type of companies aren't going to be very picky about whether or not you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, etc. What I found is that the companies who are looking for juniors and seniors are the ones who are looking for, we want to hire you as an intern, and then also if you're good, we want to just keep you on and offer you a job at the end. And so if you're a freshman or you're a sophomore, that's really not something in your timeline. So the company that I ended up interning for this summer was a startup, so they were looking for extra manpower. So they saw past the fact that I was a freshman and actually bothered to look at my resume and see my skills. And I find that it's not that freshmen and sophomores don't have the skills, it's purely that they have some filter on the application process that as soon as they see the fact that you're not a junior or senior, they don't even continue to look at your application. So it may not be that you're not qualified, it just really might be you didn't reach the age gap that they're looking for.
Completely agreed. I think like, especially starting off, something to get your foot in the door is to be applying to the maybe not as large corporations, but slightly smaller. Like when I worked at Gallery and Company, it was definitely not as big as like it wasn't a huge corporation, but was smaller and allowed for me to like I feel like experience more, because I feel like if you also work at a smaller company in the beginning, it allows for you to really understand the company better and like get to experience more and like sort of ask more questions and be more curious, and like allows for you to be able to like get the most out of your internship and know really what you want. So um, that's definitely something that's really important.
Great. So where did you find your internships? Where were you searching? Was it a career fair? Was it a specific website? Was it you knew someone, or you knew you were looking in a specific area and so you targeted that location? How did you find out about these positions to apply to, or ones that maybe you didn't get but you also applied to?
I definitely think the career fair was how I got my past internship. So I applied and I got an on-campus interview, and then I got an on-site interview. So that was the interview process for that. So I definitely think, and also I applied like even currently like through like all these like I use like Glassdoor, Indeed, like all those general like I search up. I literally have like an Excel sheet of companies, and I apply and like go down the list and that sort of thing. So definitely like searching up and like seeing, okay, like software engineering internships and applying like that. And also networking, like so going on LinkedIn and like making sure your LinkedIn profile is as accurate of a representation of your professional profile as it can be. And then reaching out to people who have internships from different companies that you are interested in, and like seeing, okay, like, hey, can we talk, and like sort of talking to them, and then talking to recruiters, and like if you see that they're a recruiter for a company that you're interested in for, so things like that. I definitely think like reaching out and like showing that you're interested in them is something that's important as well.
Yeah, the internship that I actually got, I got through working with Careers for Terps. I actually had a few meetings with Rachel, who helped me like find out different companies in the area, because I was very particular that I wanted to be home my first summer, and I'm an out-of-state student. So that's also something really cool, is that Maryland's really good about helping out-of-state students in addition to find internships, not just in the College Park / DC area. But the other thing that I found that was really helpful was not just walking in with, I want a computer science internship, was having some sort of guideline. So for me, it was, I'm focused on, I want to work for a startup. I want that, like that vibe and that experience of working at a startup organization. So I only filtered by searching for startups based in a specific areas that I was able to work at. So that also helps. I think it's just very overwhelming to just be trying to find a computer science internship in general, because that is such a broad umbrella and you definitely have different specific interests. So it doesn't hurt to be a little bit more narrow focused in as far as like looking in that way. And then Sneha mentioned Glassdoor. It's a great place to like just look at what is out there, and you can see the different opportunities if you want to do software engineering, data analytics, cybersecurity, etc. And then also, if you haven't already, creating a LinkedIn account and then going through LinkedIn is another avenue, because then you can also see what your other peers have done and gets you more ideas as to what to look for. But really use Careers for Terps. They're really good at helping.
Thank you for the kind plug for me and for Careers for Terps and the Career Fair, all the things that we do. Certainly not the only way. But as a Terp alum myself and one who was out of state, I totally understand how it is just a different world sometimes when you look in Careers for Terps and don't see as many things in your area. Even if you're from the state of Maryland, you may be looking to go somewhere else. And so we absolutely want to help with that. Jeffrey tells me we have a couple questions from students, so I'm going to pass it to him to ask one of those. Please remember, as you have questions, you can put them in the chat to Jeffrey.
All right, thanks, Rachel. So one of the questions that come in, I guess this is kind of like a two-part question, so I'll just kind of ask the first part of the question now, is how do I make sure that my resume or application is enough to get me to like the interview stage of the application process?
So making sure that you satisfy the general requirements that the company has provided. Usually the company says like, okay, you have to like be a certain, like know these languages, have this amount of years about like certain experiences. So making sure you fulfill those requirements, because that's something they definitely are checking for, and making sure you sort of highlight them or tailor your resume towards the company that you're applying for. And then also making sure that you have a sort of like looking and seeing what projects and what languages they use. So doing your a little bit of side research, and then like showing that you also have those skills in order to satisfy the role. And not only that, but writing a cover letter is definitely something that shows your interest as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that you make sure your resume has every single piece or detail that the company has listed as like required qualifications or preferred qualifications. And that might even like include like small things, like if they said like, a good working of the collaboration or like team leading, like if you can emphasize that whether in letter or in your resume, even if it's like, you think it's like, oh, everybody has that. Everybody doesn't have those skills actually. So if you're able to highlight that in a way that you're not explicitly stating, I can be a leader, that'll also end up helping and making your resume stand out a little bit.
Thanks. So sort of the second part to this question, when it comes to like the actual interview process, what are your experiences with technical interviews, if any? And if you do have experience with technical interviews, what is your approach to answering the questions that they ask?
So for technical interviews, one important thing, at least before a technical interview, just like making sure that you are prepping. So preparation for a technical interview, for me at least, it requires a lot of leak code. Leak code is like my go-to for a technical interview. I like just keep on doing questions, um, going through like arrays and strings, linked lists, graphs and trees, and going through all the data structures and algorithms and making sure I'm really prepped. And when it comes to the day of the interview, um, I generally think that I usually spend the day of the interview not doing too much lead code or sort of coding things, just because like it'll like sort of burn you out, especially because during the technical interview you want to really have a clear mind and making sure you're ready. And then when the question is like given, like the technical interview, usually it's like on some sort of platform, coding platform, and like they usually like paste whatever question it is. And what I do is like once I read it, I just want to clarify with the interviewer what the question is. So I like repeat the question back to the interviewer and I'm like, okay, this is the purpose of the question. And then I usually talk through what my solution is. So before I even start coding, I usually talk about it, and I generally talk about the runtime about it. So I like clarify that what I'm doing, I know is trying to be the most optimal in my opinion. So I usually do that. And then once I like sort of give my idea and talk it out with the interviewer, then I'm like, okay, is it all right if I start coding? And then I start coding, and I provide my most optimal solution, which might be very naive in the beginning. And then I sort of try to make it as optimal as I could, talking through the interviewer. And once I'm done, I usually talk about test cases, and then talk about the runtime and space complexity. So that's usually like the breakdown of my technical interviews. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the one thing that Sneha touched on that I think is really important is like talking while you're doing the technical interviews, like through your programming, like even while you're coding, not to just be coding in silence, because the end of the day, that technical interview isn't really like testing your ability to physically code. It's more testing how your brain works and how you attempt the problem and how you're problem solving. So if you're not really talking your methods through or you're explaining yourself, they don't really get a feel for that. And at the end of the day, there's plenty of people who are able to like code physically, but like the way you problem solve will make you unique. And the other thing that is that if you like mess up or your code isn't like ideal or something, if you're talking your way through and you're showing that you know what you're doing or you're capable of problem solving or adapting to different strategies, that itself is a lot more impressive to the interviewer than, okay, cool, she did it in silence, I don't really know what she did, but it technically works and it's efficient. The other thing is to make sure that typically what they'll do is they'll give you a choice of a few languages for you to do your coding interview in, and you should pick with what you're comfortable with rather than what you think might impress them. Because at the end of the day, if something's like small and basic and a language that you're not very comfortable with and you miss that concept, it might come across as that you don't know as much as what you really do. And the interview is supposed to be as comfortable as possible. So try and create it as an atmosphere that is comfortable for you and be able to take your time and really work through it. And for people who are more like freshmen, sophomores, I think some of the concepts that Sneha probably touched on, you may have not learned yet in your classes, which is like totally fine, because while you're doing your interview, you can talk about like whether or not that is something you've learned or it's not something you learned, or it's a place that you're like looking to grow on, and how that internship is a possibility for you to grow and learn more about that. So that's also something to keep in mind, and not to get scared if something comes up that you don't know.
I love all those points. I just want to point out that in the chat, I shared a link to an upcoming technical interview workshop that will also have time to practice interview towards the end, and that's coming up in November. So if you're interested in that, the link is provided in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you all for the very detailed answer to the technical interview question. I feel like I'm learning a lot and I'm not even a computer science student. The next question that came up is about specifically getting like letters of recommendation or references to serve on like your resume or your application. So this individual asked, how do you ask a professor for a letter of recommendation or a reference, especially when I've never met my professor with asynchronous classes who doesn't host office hours?
That's difficult. So I think something that's really important with that is that really finding any other mode of communication with your professor, because it's like a difficult situation where it's asynchronous and there are no office hours. It's sort of like, okay, what are my other places I could talk to? And I think definitely like emailing and just showing your interest in the class to the professor itself. So you want to make sure that your professor knows you and is that you're just not like it's there's more connection. And also maybe possibly if the professor is up for it, maybe even having like setting up a meeting and sort of having a conversation or asking questions or something like that. So having more of a connection, and then um after maybe a couple of emails and stuff like that, just showing your interest in the class, maybe asking a few questions about concepts that you're unsure about. Then you could be like, hey, like, do you think you would be able to write a letter of recommendation for me? So I definitely think that being able to like create that relationship with your professor but prior to asking for a letter of recommendation is very important.
Yeah, I also think that right now, given the situation, most professors are pretty reasonable and understanding of the fact that the online platform or approach to education means that we don't have that proper connection. And I'm sure most professors realize that they don't have that connection with their students. So I think if you were to approach the professor by asking like, hey, I'd like an opportunity to meet with you and talk to you, you can use that. And I'm sure even if they don't specifically hold office hours, if you email asking a professor for time to talk to them, they'll be able to schedule time in their day, sometime in the week, to be able to talk to them. So I wouldn't take no office hours as the end all of I cannot ever have a conversation with you or a Zoom call or something like that, because most professors are pretty reasonable in finding some kind of time for you. The other thing is that if the professor you're looking to talk to is a CS professor and you need this recommendation letter, and there's another professor who's not in the CS department, but you have a better relationship with them, you can consider going to that professor as well, because the letter of recommendations are supposed to highlight different things about you that don't explicitly come out in your resume or in your cover letter. So if a professor who knows you very well but isn't in the CS department is able to speak to that more, that also might be more beneficial in the end for you, if they can speak more about you on a personal level than a professor who doesn't know you very well.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit with classes and getting recommendations right now, but what's it like to be an intern during COVID? And I'm assuming both of you worked remotely. What is it like? How is it different? How is it similar? What are some things to be aware of?
um I felt like it was very interesting. My recruiters did such an amazing job making it the best sort of virtual internship it could be. We did a lot of coffee chats with like industry professionals within the company, and like allowed us to sort of making sure like like that we have a communication with as many people in the company as we can. But important things to note as an intern, um, like being like work from home and virtual, is that making sure that you aren't sort of like you're making the most out of your internship. So it's like making sure you are going to stay connected with your manager, your mentor if you have one, and like making sure that you are able to ask questions. And like I sort of always make sure that there was like a check-in, like 2 to 3 times per week for my manager if it works for your company. And just making sure you have that sort of relationship with your manager and like anyone else, like your colleagues, because I think like being able to have that is important, just as like a professional relationship, and also for you to be able to learn and just like allows you for you to feel comfortable. And some things I realized is that like having meetings all day, it's tough, especially because you're sitting in your room as you have as you have like meetings all day. But definitely like maybe like trying to like like within gaps, just like going on a walk, like refreshing your brain, like just like something for you to be able to like get out of your room, and like when you come back, like being able to pay attention and like stay engaged during your meetings. So there are like some cons, but like trying to overcome it is like just like going on walks, making sure that you stay engaged and connected with your colleagues.
Yeah, I found that with my internship working remotely, because everyone at my company was all in different country. Like there were some people who like were in another country too. So that itself was an interesting experience, like time zones with meetings. But I felt that because we were in the middle of the like lockdown and pandemic and summer break and everything, there's this expectation from everyone that we had more time to work and give and dedicate towards the internship, which like I guess is true because we were in a lockdown, so we couldn't go anywhere. But at the end of the day, like summer is also a time for you to take a step back from schoolwork and take like a mental break from everything. So I think if you do feel like you're being like not like overworked, but like you're given more than what you would have actually been given if you were on site, because that strict like work 9 to 5 on site idea isn't really there anymore because you're like logging your hours from home and meeting deadlines whenever that might be. So making sure that you're creating a schedule and an hours and you're sticking to those hours that you've agreed with your supervisor. The other weird experience was not ever actually like meeting my supervisor or my like coworkers face to face ever, and having a ton of meetings where all our cameras are off and you just hear voices coming out of your computer. So those like connections and like relationships that you develop with your coworkers, just it wasn't really there. Like I know these people from working with them. Every now and then I'll get a Slack message from them with like problems and we'll work together to solve them. But I don't have like a relationship with these people outside of work, which you typically do form in your internships. So I think those two were the biggest differences that from interning not during a pandemic and interning during a pandemic.
I just wanted to mention like about the videos. Another thing that I realized at an internship, just like um, if like if you feel comfortable and there's like it's like a bigger call and there are some people who have their videos on, try and turn your video on. It just helps if you feel comfortable doing that, because I just feel like having that, it sort of keeps you like more like it's like as real as like it's in person as possible, sort of. And it just like makes you feel more engaged and like you're actually seeing someone. And at least maybe there's only like 3 or 4 other people on the call with their video on, but at least it makes you feel like you're really kind of there. So
Awesome. Thank you for that. So we have another question. So it seems like you two have a lot of great experience coming in. And so going back to sort of preparing for these internships, at what point during like your time at UMD did you start preparing for applying to internships and doing all of sort of the skill building things you recommended earlier on in the panel today? Like, did you start like as soon as you like got as soon as you started classes, like during your first semester, were you like all into like self-teaching yourself different coding languages and like working on personal projects? Did you wait until like your second semester maybe? At what point did you start to really seriously prepare to become a successful candidate for some of these internships?
honestly, for me, it kind of went in waves. So freshman year, if I'm being completely honest, I didn't do that much for technical interview prep. It really began sophomore year, where I had gotten my internship in like October. So, but even after that, I still did want to prepare and like kind of just be like stay like connected with like just like different data structures and just like stay comfortable with things, especially because you never know during an internship when you're going to need to apply something. So over winter break, sort of when you're in your breaks, spend like a little bit of time like every day just like doing a couple of questions. So like I also got the Cracking the Coding interview book. It's also there's an online version as well. So um I went through that and like just like pick and chose problems and like looked at the solutions for other ones. Um Definitely doing like like a couple problems every day. Even like leak code, there's like challenges that come up, I think like every couple of like a month, or like there's even daily ones. So just doing those, just during your breaks, being able to do that. And um it doesn't have to be that when you have an interview you start preparing, but more like you just start working on like the technical stuff whenever you have time. And it doesn't matter if you have an internship, if you're working towards getting one, just like being able to do that, like maybe a couple of questions every day is just really important. And we're specifically with side projects, I definitely think that you whenever you have an idea, whenever you feel inspired to work on something, like you don't have to force it. So it's like I you just really want to create something and create a project, like you can start exploring and working on it by yourself. So just something like where you feel genuinely interested about, and whenever you do, start working on it. So I definitely think you don't need to force that. And or it's like, for example, like a certification, whenever you get time, whenever you realize maybe I can push myself a little more, maybe I have more time and I can use that time and maybe start working on an AWS certification or something like that. I think that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, so I kind of didn't really start doing a whole lot of like extra stuff necessarily while I was in school. I kind of focused more on like my classes, my extracurriculars. I looked at like the different clubs that were on campus. There's a lot of different CS based clubs on campus that were like really interesting to me, that exposed me to different like fields in CS or ways to apply it. So I think for me, I more did that kind of stuff. Like our winter break is really long. I think we have like a month and a half of winter break. So like, I like celebrated like, Christmas, New Year's with my family, and then it was January and all my other friends had gone back and I'm still here until the end of January at home. So like during that time you can, pull up a personal project or like go on Udemy or Coursera or something and like, learn about different, like pull up a different language and just fiddle around with it. Or like look into the AWS certifications. But I think for me, it was more if I had downtime and it was like excess downtime, then I would use some of that to dedicate towards developing a new technical skill or something like that. But I think those are also really good ideas or stuff to practice if, say, you don't have an internship over the summer, instead of like stay up to date and like get some certifications. That way, the next wave of internships, you can say, well, like, look, I have like an AWS certification, or I made this project over the summer, or I learned like 4 new languages or something like that. So I think it's when you have like this large chunk of time and you don't know what to do with it, then that's when you can dedicate towards like developing different new skills.
I have a brief follow-up. What CS clubs were you involved in or did you join?
Yeah, so for the females that are studying computer science, there's like a bunch of different like female empowerment opportunities, which I highly recommend. There's the aspiring AWC, Aspiring Women in Computing, in the CS building or CS program. That's a really interesting one. I joined the Technica board, so I'm helping plan the Maryland's all-female non-binary hackathon. That's actually coming in 2 weeks, if you want to register and do it. And then I'm also an officer for the Data and Cloud Computing Society that we have on campus, which is dedicated towards teaching students on campus about AWS, helping you do projects with that. So because I joined those clubs, I kind of got exposure and more technical skills just by being in clubs and socializing with students like that. So that's also another option. You don't necessarily have to sit by yourself in your room and try and code something through. You can be collaborative and work with other people. And they're pretty interesting people here on campus.
Awesome. So kind of as a follow-up to the previous question that I had asked, and maybe it might relate to some of your experiences with the student clubs that you're involved in. Someone is asking if each of you could share like a personal project that you've worked on and what inspires you to work on that project. Like, what was the premise for it?
Um, so my junior year of high school, I had gone to a hackathon called Fem Hacks, and that was in like hosted by UPenn. And there I was working on like an Android Studio project, and later on I got like we were just like exploring other different projects and other different projects from other students, and this one person made like they used hardware and like made a Morse code converter where it's a physical button, and they literally converted it into English. So I was thinking like, I mean, I can code like software things. So I was like, how can I implement that? And because I thought it was just super cool. So when I came back, like I was able to like I just like really wanted to try this. So I like essentially made an app for using Android Studio, and I converted, so it was like a button, and like you inputted messages through your like finger, and like you like use Morse code, and it converted all of it to English. So you can like convert like sentences into English, and it would play it back to you. So that's just an example of something that like I just saw that I thought was interesting, and I just did it on my own. And another one is like I was really interested in like this company called Purevelo, and they opened up spin studios on different like college campuses. So I reached out to them. I was like, hey, like I am a like student, a computer science student, and I was wondering if you would be able to like if you wanted me to develop an app for you guys. And I started using React Native, and I just do this on the side where whenever I have time, it's sort of a more flexible thing where whenever I have time, I just work on this project where I'm able to, they can like schedule classes through my app, and they can sort of online shop and things like that. So that's something I'm working on the side. So it's just like, that's just a few things that I'm working on.
Yeah, so before I thought I might be interested in data analytics, I found out there's a language R, so I started like messing around with that, and ended up like doing analysis with that to like look at whether or not education standards can influence like GDP. So I tried to kind of combine my interest in economics and my interest in data science. So I have like a paper that I ended up writing up with my findings about that. So I'm able to use that and talk about it with potential employers when they're asking me about my interests or like what I look to apply my computer science with, because that's usually a big question that you're going to get is like, okay, so you've learned all this like tech, what do you want to do with it? So then I can pull that as a reference as to what I want to do with it. So I end up doing more personal projects similar to that, like applying it more to like looking at like with data, what does this tell me about this country or with this economy and things like that, because that's what I'm personally interested in. It's also why I'm minoring in global poverty. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was that personal projects don't necessarily have to be strictly like creating some sort of app or website. In the end, it also could be like developing a club or developing some kind of like program or outreach with people that's related to computer science. So something else that I have done is work in Philadelphia to teach like middle school girls about like robotics and an introduction to programming. So it's like an outreach program that's like introduction to like Scratch and robotics, because it's sixth grade girls, but it works with like kids in inner city Philadelphia. So it shows them a different career path and opportunity that their high school may not necessarily teach them about. So like that would also be considered a personal project, and it's STEM related, but it's not necessarily that I built an app, but it is something that like, look, I'm using what I have and I'm giving back to my community, which is also something that employers really look about, because it shows leadership, it shows cooperation, it shows I took initiative, and it also shows that this is another thing I can use my technical skills to do.
Awesome. These sound like really awesome and cool projects, and hopefully people in the audience can get some inspiration to start something of their own after today's presentation. So another question that came in, and it seems like it's a little bit tied to this because when you're writing a cover letter to a company, for instance, you want to demonstrate sort of your interests and your passions as it relates to the position and why you're interested in pursuing like a internship with that particular company. But what would you recommend putting on a cover letter that is that so like some job boards will have you submit like a cover letter through a portal that will kind of have you submit your application to a whole bunch of different positions. So what difference is there when you're writing a cover letter to a job board or job posting that isn't tailored to a specific position versus one where it is tailored to a specific position?
So in a cover letter, when you're doing it to a specific position, you're trying to show that you're going to be the best, or not the best fit, but like a really good fit for that position. So showing like explaining sort of why you would be sort of benefiting from working in that role, as well as how will the company benefit from you working in that role. So really showing that two-way street where it's going to be mutually beneficial. And also why that company, like why do you want to work there? Is there something like what's like the sort of the mission of like the company, and how does that align with your goals? And if it's like a cover letter that's not tailored, that's like sort of showing your project and your skills, and talking about just you in general and why you would be good in generally a software engineering role. So, but it's not going to be specific to a company. So.
Yeah, so the cover letter that you're writing to a specific company, I think if that company has like a motto or a mission statement, or like we like to foster an environment that does XYZ, or like we want interns to get out this ABC, making sure you incorporate that somewhere in your cover letter, because you do want your cover letter to be somewhat specific to the company, so that way they can't just be like, oh, you just Control F and change our company name with another company name and then sent us this letter, because sometimes it can be a little obvious, and then it shows that you didn't really put that much like effort into it, even if you did put effort into the original like template of that paper. So doing something like that, that's another place to highlight. If they said we require, students who have a background in AWS, and you say like, I have a background in AWS. In fact, I've done ABC and all these different projects, or something like that. So elaborating more on the requirements. And then that's also a great place to talk about any of your personal projects or skill sets. You don't really need to repeat things on your resume. So you don't need to say like, oh, I interned here, and so I did this. Like they saw that on your resume. So it's really an opportunity for you to add extra elements that wasn't already written on your resume to begin with. So personal projects, or like if you have this experience that you think really is something important for employers to know about you, putting it there. As far as the specific difference between a general one, if you have a general cover letter that you're just putting onto a platform that's going to go to multiple people, then that cover letter is just really trying to highlight who you are as like your personality, your skill sets, any like, again, projects and things like that, versus those specific company is more tailoring everything about you to be like, look, this is exactly how it would fit into your picture, into your scope. And like, so it's a kind of the same thing, except you want that extra element of, and here's how I specifically tailor myself to fit at your company.
Thank you. So another question that came in pertains more to the networking aspect of the internship or job search process. So I know like some of the advice that gets thrown out there in terms of connecting with folks is to contact them on like LinkedIn or on different platforms to like, start a conversation so you can get a better understanding of what it's like to work at a specific company, or, get like some insider tips about working for a particular, working for that particular company. So what's your advice about reaching out to recruiters or alumni even, or professionals on LinkedIn or any other platform when you don't like know who they are?
When originally connecting with them, maybe sending them a message. So like, I think on LinkedIn, there's a feature where you're able to like, when you're requesting a connection, say like, hey, like I'm from the same college and I just found what you do is really cool. So having that in the beginning, so sort of like creating that, and then like if they do accept your connection, then like sort of starting up a conversation on LinkedIn messages. So saying like asking questions, maybe like setting up a call, and that sort of thing is definitely very important. So I feel like that's gonna like allow for you to network um in that using LinkedIn. Any other way is like maybe even like doing like Google searches and seeing like, oh, maybe if there like information's there where you can email them directly, or things like that, or even like at like UMD has like a lot of different like sort of panels from like different companies. So maybe going to that, and like usually they would have like recruiters there and things like that, or definitely like ways to be able to like connect to different companies and things like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, usually I recommend that people try and find someone that they might know of a person and just have some sort of basic connection. Not that it's like, considered impolite or anything. It's just easier to start that conversation if you have some sort of mutual connection. And that could be like you talk to like someone in the career for Terps and they said like, oh, there's a former alumni who now works for that organization. Here's a contact, and then that alumni can like connect you with the appropriate people or something like that. But if you don't have that option and you really do need to strictly go through LinkedIn, I think also just not being afraid to ask for help, or for the like ask if there are opportunities, and don't like beat around the bush, and just kind of like be like, hey, I see that you work here and I'm interested in those opportunities, like in the same field. Are there any opportunities for me to connect and talk to you about? And just understanding that LinkedIn is the platform for making those connections, so you shouldn't be afraid to ask for what you want.
Awesome. So this kind of connects to this next question kind of connects to what both of you were talking about earlier in terms of like preparing for interviews or like working on personal projects. You had all like sprinkled in some information about places and like websites and platforms you can use to develop your coding skills. So what are like some of the things I heard were like Coursera, React, Sneha, you mentioned that one website where you could practice like for like coding interviews, like where you get coding questions. What are like some of the best resources for one, like preparing to like for some of these interviews, developing your skills, maybe like developing or working on a portfolio for a personal project? What are some of the top resources that you recommend?
For technical interviews, definitely just like cracking the coding interview is one of the most important things to look at, especially because it does go over like concepts and gives a ton of questions. Leak code, because like what they do in leak code is that they do it based on company for some companies, and I think that's really good. So they do like getting prepared for this company, so they do have that, as well as like they have like different data structures. If you're not familiar with that data structure, they actually like give you questions and like give you like start from a very basic level and work you up to the harder questions for that data structure. So I think that's really good, especially like LeetCode does that very well. Some other platforms for sort of learning is I think it was Udemy for like learning. For example, like Angular is something I wasn't familiar with but prior to the summer. So what I did was there's tons of sales on these courses, and you could just buy them at a really discounted price. So I would use that, and I would like get the course, and then it's like literally like 20 hours of just like classes where you can just learn. And also like there's many different online resources for learning React and like React Native and like AWS. So there's lots of like courses where you're able to like do it. And then Udemy also has an AWS certification course, and in that they'll actually like they have labs where you're able to like work with them and like do it on your own. So that allows for you to be able to like get experience through that.
I really like the edX certification courses. They're free and they're pre-made like lecture kits that they put together, and there's like any topic you can think of, not just like computer science related, like literally any subject you can think of. But they're really cool because they're actually like tied with different universities. They have like different professors or people through different universities who like to do courses through that. And if you want, in the end, I think it's like $10 to pay for the certificate. So then if you do get the certificate, you can put down on your resume like the certification that you got. So like there's a bunch of classes in R, in C, in Java, in data analytics, data structures, like different things like that. And the way the courses are is they're like lecture videos for you to watch, and they're built in like little example problems for you to like be trying and doing. So I really liked those. I think those are pretty good for as like a starting place if you don't really know where to go or what to do, or if you just have like a ton of time to sit and like use courses. I really like them as a good starting place.
Awesome. So we'll take one more student question that I have right here, and then Rachel will kind of lead us with the wrap up. So we talk a lot about sort of external resources that you could use to develop your coding skills and work on projects, but specifically focusing more on like the curriculum within like the computer science department at the University of Maryland. What are some of like the core courses within the curriculum that you would say are like crucial for students to do really well in? To make sure that they have like the necessary competencies to do well in an internship. And in addition to that, what are some of like the really cool elective classes that maybe not every computer science student takes, but can lead to some pretty interesting like skills or knowledge that most other, that like not every other computer science student would have?
For core classes that I think were really integral are honestly 131 and 132. So object-oriented programming was just something that I think was really important because I really learned a lot about the basic data structures that are used and like built upon later on in computer science. So I think that was just really important to just like be really strong with. Um, and then some electives that I really appreciated. Um, so I really like data science, and I am taking introduction to data science right now. So that's seamlessly 320. And I personally liked 351 a lot. So that was algorithms. So that wasn't an elective, but because I liked algorithms a lot, I wanted to continue. So I took 451, or I'm taking 451 right now. So that's advanced algorithms. And I really appreciated that because it's just like, I just love like modifying the algorithm, just like sort of problem solving when you're given a problem and proving that your algorithm is going to be an optimal solution and efficient solution. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, all the required courses for the CS major are pretty important to just take them seriously and try to do the best you can. As far as like grade wise, not many employers actually ask for your grade specifically in your classes. They typically, if anything, they'll ask for like your GPA. And most people just say as long as you have a 3.0, you can apply or something like that. So I would focus more on making sure you feel confident in the courses that you're taking. I've taken 131, 132, and 250, and I feel like the skills I've learned from all of those have been pretty important, and I'm currently taking 216. So as far as like those, think I think the projects were probably helpful for me as far as like just like having this like short time frame to complete an assignment. And I guess that's a similar simulation as to what you're going to be doing in internships, but I mean, they are the fundamentals for programming. So I think to take those seriously. As far as electives, I'm a math minor. And so I think that pairs pretty well with CS courses as far as like something interesting. So for example, I took number theory last semester, which is actually like is really interesting and cool to look at from a CS perspective, because you're learning about like the theory behind math, and that is actually pretty applicable to computer science and pretty similar to the course CMSC 250 that you have to take at some point. So I would also suggest looking at math classes and potentially looking into a math minor. And it's actually really easy to complete with the CS major because there's a lot of overlaps between CS majors and math minors.
Great. As promised, I do have a wrap-up question. I'm going to send the link to check in if you haven't had the chance to do that yet one final time. So if you haven't done that, please do. But kind of the last follow-up question, just kind of simple, like what are some things maybe that we haven't touched on that you would give as maybe that final piece of advice? Is there something that you found really helpful or something to avoid, but that maybe we haven't touched on, or maybe we have touched on it and you want to make sure that you really drive it home as how important it is?
Being confident, honestly, like during interviews, just because you're smart and like like what there is to know, and just like being able to portray that and portray that you are confident in yourself and your knowledge, I think is just really important. So that's, and also I want to reiterate, just speaking during an interview and like showing that like just like when you're coding, don't stay silent even if you're confused. Like just like showing what you do know, and like maybe that will allow the interviewer to say, okay, so you got to that point, like what's that little thing that you're missing to like just like make that connection and start coding. I think that's so important because like I think staying silent, your interviewer doesn't know what you're thinking. So speaking during an interview and being confident is just so important.
I think for me, the biggest thing is don't shy away from an opportunity because you yourself don't think you're qualified. Because I think a lot of times you'll look at something and one of the preferred specifications might be something that you're not very confident in, but you might feel better about the others. That's not a reason to not apply and to just go for it. The internship that I got this past summer, I got the internship and I've never had that much experience with Angular JS or like Node.js, like none of that before. I still got the internship. My employer was very cool about it. And he was like, don't worry, we're gonna help teach you, because part of the internship is you're supposed to be learning. You're not just this full-fledged integrated employee, you're supposed to be learning from it. So like my employer was very much like, we totally get it, you're a student, you've only been in school for 1 year, it's totally fine. We're gonna teach you what you need to know, and then we're gonna expect you to then apply it and try it on your own. So that was pretty awesome because I didn't really know much about it going in, but they're willing to work with me and teach me and help me along the way. So you do not need to be the expert walking in. And if you have any background, that's considered enough to be qualified. Don't try and like judge yourself. Let the employer do the job as to whether or not you're qualified.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. As Jeffrey said before, I learned a lot that I can share with future students. I'm sure that our students that are watching today also learned a lot. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and advice with all of us. I am going to put a screen up really quick with my contact information and with Jeffrey. So should anyone have any questions after this, concerns, and want to follow up, you are welcome to reach out to one or both of us. But again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who attended and learned from our panelists today. But that's all we got for today. Thank you and have a good night.